All right, y'all. So in the previous lesson, we looked at how we can use the trig functions of sine, cosine, and tangent to figure out sides that are missing in a triangle. Now, what we're going to be doing today, we're going to be looking at the inverse functions of sine, cosine, and tangent. Inverse is kind of like the opposite. And those are going to give us the angles. So before, we were starting from an angle that we knew. We saw that in these examples here. We knew that was 26, or this was 57. And we could use that to find the missing side, x or y or whatever it was. Well, in this case, using the inverse functions, we're going to be using those to find the angles. So these are the angles that we are looking for. And these are called inverse trig functions. These are kind of the opposites of the standard ones. Now this tells us to find the measure of angle z. So what that tells us is that angle z is going to be our theta. We're still going to be using theta. Theta is the angle that we are looking for in this case. And just like the standard sine, we're going to be dealing with the opposite and the hypotenuse. So we have the opposite side from theta, that's right across, and we have the side across from the right angle. That's our hypotenuse. But since we know both of the sides and we don't know the angle, we're going to be doing something called the inverse function. And that looks something like this. The inverse sine is just the sine with a little -1 up in the exponent spot. And that tells us that the inverse sine of my opposite side over my hypotenuse equals my angle. So kind of it's like the angle that we're looking for and the opposite over hypotenuse fraction switched places. So now the opposite over hypotenuse goes in the parentheses, and that's what we're going to be plugging into the calculator. So we can look at our pieces. We can see that the sine of -1 of my opposite over hypotenuse. My opposite side is 3. My hypotenuse is 9. So my inverse sine of 3 over 9 equals theta, my angle that I'm looking for. And to put that in the calculator, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to make sure I'm in degrees. So make sure you're in degrees first. Go to the mode button, toggle down, make sure you're in degrees. And then you can use the inverse sine. And the inverse sine, cosine, and tangent functions are in the same spot as the sine, cosine, and tangent buttons. We just have to hit second first. So second and then the sine button. So we have the inverse sine of 3 divided by 9. You can put that in fraction form, but just dividing works as well. So 3 divided by 9, hit enter, and we should get approximately 19.5. So this tells us that theta is about 19.5, and we know that that's in degrees. Now the inverse of cosine and tangent works the exact same way. We're switching the spots of, instead of where we're looking for the side, we're looking for the angle in this case. So the inverse cosine of my adjacent, I'm going to start to abbreviate this, ADJ over HYP, adjacent over hypotenuse. That will tell me my angle, my theta. And this tells me to find the measure of angle y. That's my theta. So I know that my adjacent is 3. And my hypotenuse is 9. So I can plug that in the calculator. the inverse cosine of 3 over 9 equals theta. So it looks just like inverse sine of 3 over 9, but it's cosine instead. So plug that in the calculator. Second, then push the cosine button. 3 divided by 9, and we get about 70.5. Theta is about 70.5 degrees. And the last function is tangent. Works much the same way, where we take the inverse tangent of -1, and that is the inverse of the opposite over the adjacent equals our theta. And this problem asks us to find the measure of angle E. That's our theta. I don't know the hypotenuse. I know my two legs. So I know my opposite side is 14, and my adjacent side is 8. So opposite and adjacent. So I can put that in the calculator. Inverse tangent of 14 over 8 equals my theta. And I'll put that in the calculator. Second, then the tangent button. 14 divided by 8. And we get about 60.3. It's about 60.255. Rounds up to 60.3. And those are our inverse tangent functions. So the difference between these and the standards is you're going to use the standard trig functions, standard trigonometric functions, sine, cosine, and tangent, to find the sides of your triangle. You're given the angle, one side, you can use it to find the other side. The inverse, you're given two sides, and you're using that to find the third side. Or excuse me, you're using that to find the angle. Those are the notes. In the next video, we'll be looking at how we can apply this to the real world with some word problems, which I know are everyone's favorite, and be using both of these types.